Judge Thompson looked down at the paperwork in front of him. The room was quiet, the usual murmur of the court temporarily stilled as Vanessa Reed stepped forward. She was dressed in a simple, yet professional, black suit that gave nothing away about her stature or background. The courtroom was filled with a mix of regular townsfolk and a few curious eyes from the local press. At first glance, Vanessa could have been anyone. And that, in Judge Thompson's eyes, was her most obvious flaw. "Ms. Reed," the judge began, peering over his glasses at her with a hint of disdain, "I trust you understand why we're here today. A ticket for improper parking on Main Street. Not exactly a criminal matter, but let's not forget that even small offenses must be dealt with." Vanessa met his gaze. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm aware." She didn't flinch. That was the first thing Judge Thompson noticed. Most people in his courtroom, especially those unfamiliar with the legal system, often squirmed under his gaze. They apologized profusely, offered explanations, or attempted to charm their way out of a fine. Not Vanessa. She simply stood tall, poised as if her every movement was deliberate. Judge Thompson wasn't sure whether he found it frustrating or admirable. "I see you've come prepared with no legal counsel," Judge Thompson continued, narrowing his eyes. "I trust you understand the rules of the court and the potential consequences of your actions." Vanessa nodded slowly, her voice calm but unyielding. "I understand the process, Your Honor." The judge's lips curled slightly as he spoke, attempting to establish his authority. "Well, you should, considering the circumstances. Let's make this clear. This isn't a minor infraction. People like you who flout basic regulations need to understand that the system holds everyone accountable." Vanessa's gaze remained steady, her expression unreadable. "I believe in the fairness of the system, Your Honor," she replied. "I respect it deeply." Something about the way she said it made Thompson pause. There was no typical fear or submission in her voice, no indication that she expected to be dismissed with a gentle warning. Her words were simply firm. He pushed the thought aside. She was just another citizen trying to skirt responsibility. "Very well," Judge Thompson said, leaning forward slightly. "Given the nature of the offense, I'm imposing a fine of $500. That should serve as a clear reminder to obey the law." He banged his gavel, the sound echoing in the room. Vanessa nodded once, as if the ruling was nothing more than a minor detail in the grand scheme of things. She turned to leave, but as she did, a slight murmur rippled through the courtroom. Someone in the back whispered her name. "Vanessa Reed, isn't that?" But the conversation died almost as quickly as it had begun. Unbeknownst to Judge Thompson, Vanessa wasn't just a regular citizen. And soon, the truth would change everything. As Vanessa stepped out of the courthouse, the bright sunlight hit her face, but she didn't flinch. The air felt crisp, but her mind was already far from the courtroom. She had handled her business, and now she could return to the life she'd built, one that demanded respect, no matter the setting. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Several reporters from local outlets were milling about, jotting down notes and preparing for the day's stories. As soon as Vanessa appeared, they turned their attention toward her. This was not a high-profile case by any means, but the sight of someone leaving the courthouse caught their interest. They had seen her walk in, calm and collected, and now they were curious about the woman who had just been fined for a minor traffic violation. A young reporter, eager for a lead, approached her first. "Ms. Reed, would you mind commenting on the case? Some of the townsfolk are talking about how strict the judge was in your case." Vanessa paused, turning to face the journalist. She was used to such inquiries, but this time, there was something different in her voice as she answered. "There's no need for me to comment on the fine itself, but I do believe in the fairness of the system and the importance of integrity within it. That's what matters to me." Her words were brief, but there was a quiet authority in them. The reporter, sensing she wouldn't offer more, tried again, this time a bit more personal. "You mentioned the system. Are you involved in any legal work yourself?" Vanessa hesitated only for a moment before she gave a simple response. "Yes, I do have a position in military justice." She didn't elaborate further, but the word hung in the air, leaving the reporter intrigued. Military justice wasn't something that came up often in small-town cases, and her cool demeanor made it clear that whatever role she held, it was significant. At first, the reporter assumed she was referring to some lower-level administrative job. But as he typed out his notes, another thought crossed his mind. What if she's someone more important? Later that evening, the story was published with a mention of Vanessa's position in military justice. The line was small, barely noticed, but one persistent journalist, Oliver Grant from a national outlet, didn't let it go. He decided to dig deeper. A few hours of online research later, Oliver's eyes widened as he stumbled across Vanessa's profile. It wasn't just any role. Vanessa Reed was the Chief Justice for Military Tribunals, one of the highest-ranking legal positions in the entire country, responsible for overseeing some of the most high-profile cases in military history. The discovery hit like a bombshell. The next morning, Oliver's article went live, revealing the full extent of Vanessa's position. Within hours, news outlets picked it up, and suddenly, the world knew exactly who Vanessa Reed was. Judge Thompson, still in his quiet office, would soon learn just how much of a mistake he had made. Judge Thompson was reviewing his calendar for the next day when his phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the screen, expecting a routine call from a colleague or maybe a reminder about an upcoming case. Instead, it was his old friend, Judge Miller, from the district court. "Thompson, you better sit down." Miller's voice came through, tense and urgent. "You remember that case you had today? The one with the woman, Vanessa Reed. You need to read the news." Thompson's brow furrowed. Vanessa Reed. He had barely given her a second thought. The fine was small, routine, and she hadn't shown any signs of being someone of consequence, just another driver who made an error. "She's got some sort of legal issue?" Thompson asked, thinking there might have been a misunderstanding. "Not an issue," Miller interrupted. "She's the Chief Justice for Military Tribunals. You find her, Thompson. You find Vanessa Reed, the highest-ranking judge in the country for military trials." Thompson's hand froze in midair. His pulse quickened. "Wait, what? Are you sure? The woman in my court? I'm not kidding. It's all over the news. Look it up, and you'll see." The words hit him like a gut punch. He had dealt with many high-profile cases over the years, but nothing that could compare to the storm he was about to walk into. Judge Thompson immediately pulled up his phone and began scrolling through the news articles that were flooding his feed. The story about Vanessa Reed was everywhere. Her position, her achievements, her influence. Chief Justice of Military Tribunals. He couldn't believe it. He thought back to his exchange with her, the dismissive tone he'd used, the way he had imposed the maximum fine without hesitation. A sense of dread began to seep into him. He had acted with authority and arrogance, assuming she was just another face in his courtroom. How could he have missed something so obvious? His heart sank further as he remembered her expression in the courtroom. She had been calm, composed, but not in the way someone who was trying to appease a judge would be. It wasn't fear or submission in her eyes. It was something else. Confidence. She had known something he hadn't, and now he understood why. Judge Thompson quickly gathered his thoughts, but his mind raced. The media was already calling him out, questioning how a seasoned judge could have failed to recognize such a significant figure. He was being blasted for his ignorance, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized how badly he had misjudged the situation. How could I have been so blind? He asked himself. He hadn't even thought to ask her what she did, hadn't taken a second to consider that there might be more to Vanessa Reed than met the eye. He had assumed his authority would go unchallenged, but now it felt like the walls of his courtroom were closing in around him. The world was about to see just how big his mistake had been. The news hit fast, spreading like wildfire across every media outlet. It didn't take long for the story to go viral. Headlines screamed about the courtroom incident. Judge finds military tribunal's chief justice without knowing her identity. Social media platforms exploded with opinions, debates, and outrage. As the story gained momentum, the public began to dissect every detail. On one side, there were those who felt that Judge Thompson's actions were an example of deep-seated ignorance and bias. Many questioned how a judge, no matter his rank, could fail to recognize one of the most powerful legal figures in the country. Others, particularly in legal circles, raised concerns about how such an oversight could have serious implications for his professional judgment in future cases. On the other side, there were a few who defended Judge Thompson, arguing that the judge had no way of knowing who Vanessa Reed was. It's not his fault he didn't recognize her, some said. Not everyone is familiar with the military judicial system. Yet even these voices were drowned out by the tide of condemnation. The discussion on social media grew even more intense, with users quickly sharing articles and memes poking fun at the judge's apparent ignorance. Hashtags like #RespectTheJudge and #KnowYourAudience began trending. The public wasn't merely focused on the fine. It was about how the judge had treated Vanessa, assumed she was beneath him, without giving her the benefit of the doubt. For Vanessa, the media frenzy felt like an invasion. Yet she didn't shy away from the attention. Early the next morning, she issued a brief, but pointed, statement to the press. Respect is not something that should be granted based on position or appearance, she said. It should be a universal practice, regardless of who you are standing before the court. I hope this serves as a reminder that justice is not determined by rank or identity. It is about fairness. Her words, simple and direct, struck a chord. Many praised her for maintaining composure while making a clear statement about equality and respect. Her response was seen as not only graceful but wise beyond the situation. It was an opportunity for the nation to reflect on deeper issues, how race, gender, and perception played into everyday interactions, even in places as official as the courtroom. Meanwhile, Judge Thompson found himself at the center of an unexpected storm. His phone rang nonstop. Family members, colleagues, even old friends were reaching out, expressing shock or offering advice. His inbox was flooded with messages ranging from supportive to critical. But no matter what, he couldn't shake the feeling that his professional credibility had been damaged in ways he might never fully recover from. With the media pressing, calls for an apology began to grow louder. Public pressure was mounting. People wanted to know, would Judge Thompson own up to his mistake, or would he double down on his misguided judgment? The clock was ticking, and the heat on Thompson was intensifying by the hour. The pressure on Judge Thompson continued to escalate. By the time he arrived at his office the following morning, his secretary had placed a stack of emails and press clippings on his desk. Most of them were complaints or questions from colleagues, legal associations, and angry citizens. His phone had been ringing nonstop, and his inbox was flooded with messages of disapproval. The story had gone from a courtroom mistake to a full-blown scandal, and the legal community, especially those with knowledge of military justice, had been quick to criticize his ignorance. At the same time, there was growing demand for Thompson to publicly address his actions. Social media was relentless. News outlets kept replaying clips of Vanessa Reed's composed statement to the press. The contrast between her calm and his impulsive, dismissive behavior only seemed to amplify the situation. As the days passed, Thompson's reputation began to unravel. The Judicial Oversight Board had already scheduled a meeting with Thompson to discuss the incident, but before that, he had to act quickly. With his career on the line, Thompson knew there was no escaping the backlash unless he made a public apology. He couldn't afford to appear defiant or dismissive. It would only make things worse. So he called a press conference. The following afternoon, standing in front of a crowded room of reporters, cameras flashing, Judge Thompson cleared his throat, his face tight with discomfort. He had prepared a statement, but the weight of the moment made every word feel heavier. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today to acknowledge a serious mistake I made in my courtroom, he began, his voice steady, but not without hesitation. I had the privilege of overseeing a case involving Ms. Vanessa Reed, a highly respected member of our legal community, whom I failed to recognize for who she truly is. I deeply regret the way I handled this case and the lack of respect I showed her in that moment." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. I did not know who Ms. Reed was when she appeared before me. That is no excuse for how I acted, and I want to sincerely apologize for treating her with anything less than the dignity she deserves. A few reporters exchanged glances, scribbling down notes, but there was no immediate response. Thompson knew that while an apology was necessary, it wouldn't undo the damage he had done. The public was clamoring for more than just words. They wanted to know what he was going to do next, how he would ensure this kind of ignorance didn't happen again. "I will be taking steps to learn from this mistake," he continued. "I am committed to further educating myself on the various roles in the legal and military justice systems and to ensure that I am more mindful in the future. I hope that my actions moving forward will reflect my sincere commitment to fairness and respect for all those who come before me." The room fell silent for a moment. The apology was out there, but the questions remained. Was this enough to repair the damage? Could Thompson regain the trust of the public and his colleagues? The road to redemption, it seemed, would be a long one. As he left the conference, Thompson felt the weight of his words. He had apologized, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that what he had said didn't truly capture the depth of his mistake. It was the beginning of his reckoning, but it was only the first step on a path he wasn't sure he could walk alone. While Judge Thompson faced the fallout from his public apology, Vanessa Reed remained a steady presence, unfazed by the chaos around her. Her name was now known nationwide, and though the media continued to speculate on every detail of her life, she chose not to indulge in the spectacle. Instead, she focused on the work that had brought her to such a high rank in the first place, overseeing the military tribunals that shaped critical decisions in national security. But the story had reached her colleagues in the military justice system, and their reactions were swift. Some were angered by how Vanessa had been treated. The idea that someone in such a powerful position could be so easily dismissed in a courtroom was a slap in the face to the military legal community. Others, however, were proud of how Vanessa had handled the entire situation. They admired her restraint and professionalism, especially in the face of such public ignorance and embarrassment. A private meeting was called by General Charles Hawkins, a senior leader within the military legal system, to discuss the incident and its implications. The room was filled with high-ranking officers, all of whom knew Vanessa and respected her greatly. It was clear that they stood united in support of her, not just because of her rank, but because of her unwavering commitment to justice. "Vanessa, you handled yourself with remarkable poise," General Hawkins began, his voice tinged with admiration. "I think I speak for all of us when I say that we stand behind you. The way Judge Thompson treated you was completely unacceptable." Vanessa nodded, but her expression remained calm, her thoughts clearly focused on something deeper than just the public spectacle. "I appreciate the support, General," she replied. "But this isn't just about me. It's about a system that fails to recognize the value of individuals beyond what they look like or where they come from." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. "I've spent years working in the military justice system, fighting for fairness, equity, and respect. It's important that we don't let this moment overshadow the larger issues at play, issues of bias, assumptions, and respect for everyone, no matter their position." Her words resonated with everyone in the room. It was clear that Vanessa wasn't just seeking personal vindication. She was using this moment to shed light on the deep-rooted biases that affected how people were treated, even within the most professional settings. Her leadership in the tribunal system was now more critical than ever, as she was in a unique position to lead a broader conversation about how to address racial and gender disparities within both the military and civilian legal systems. As the meeting wrapped up, General Hawkins made it clear that they would offer Vanessa a more public-facing role to champion these causes, something she could use to bring attention to the ongoing need for change in the way justice was perceived and administered. Vanessa didn't seek the spotlight, but it was clear that, whether she liked it or not, the spotlight had found her, and she was determined to make it count. The days following her meeting with General Hawkins were filled with constant reflection. Vanessa had seen the story about her courtroom encounter with Judge Thompson spread across every outlet, and while the media attention was overwhelming, it was also serving as a catalyst for conversations she had long hoped would happen. People were finally talking about issues that had been under the surface for years: bias in the justice system, the treatment of women and minorities in powerful roles, and the need for greater respect in all spaces. But Vanessa knew this was bigger than one moment of public exposure. She had never sought the spotlight, but she was starting to understand that it had come to her for a reason. This was a chance, not just for her, but for the entire legal community, to examine itself and confront long-standing biases. What happened in that courtroom was just a small piece of a much larger puzzle. As she sat in her office at the military tribunal, going through case files, Vanessa thought back to her years as a young lawyer, fighting to get a seat at the table. She had faced countless challenges, subtle, systemic, and often blatant, that had tried to convince her that she didn't belong in spaces of power, but she had never backed down. The battles, both personal and professional, had shaped her into the leader she was today. Now she saw an opportunity to create change, not just by winning cases or issuing rulings, but by using her platform to push for systemic reform. Vanessa wasn't interested in being a figurehead for a cause. She wanted to be a force for real change. And with the national attention on her, she knew the time was now. That week, she accepted an invitation to speak at a legal symposium, a gathering of legal professionals from both civilian and military backgrounds. It would be her first public appearance since the incident, and she knew it was important to use the opportunity wisely. The symposium wasn't just about presenting cases or sharing legal theory. It was about fostering dialogue, about showing how personal experiences shaped professional practice. When she took the stage, Vanessa felt a mix of emotions. There was still some nervousness, but it was overshadowed by a deep sense of purpose. As she began her speech, she spoke candidly about her own journey, the biases she had faced, and the way society often underestimated her because of her race and gender. But she didn't stop there. She pivoted to focus on the issue at hand. Judge Thompson's mistake wasn't just about him failing to recognize her role. It was a reflection of a larger issue: the failure to see people as more than their appearance, the failure to treat everyone with the respect and dignity they deserve. Respect, she said, her voice unwavering, is not something that should be earned based on who we are on paper. It's something we must give to one another, regardless of who stands before us. Whether in a courtroom, a boardroom, or a battlefield, respect must be the foundation of our interactions. Her words landed with power. She was no longer just talking about the incident with Judge Thompson. She was setting the stage for a broader conversation about systemic change in the legal and military systems. Vanessa's voice was now an undeniable part of the national conversation, one that would resonate long after the headlines faded. As the audience applauded, Vanessa knew this was just the beginning. Her journey was far from over, and the work ahead would be challenging, but she was ready. The spotlight might have been thrust upon her, but now it was her turn to use it to illuminate the path toward lasting change. In the months that followed Vanessa's speech, the conversation about respect, fairness, and systemic bias within the legal and military justice systems only grew. What had started as a controversial courtroom encounter had blossomed into a nationwide dialogue, one that was slowly but surely beginning to push the boundaries of what was considered acceptable in these institutions. Vanessa had become a leading voice in the conversation, but she remained grounded, focused on the work that had always been her true passion. Judge Thompson, meanwhile, found his career taking a different turn. The Judicial Oversight Board had reviewed his conduct and determined that while his actions hadn't been malicious, they had been careless and reflected a deeper need for self-awareness. As a result, Thompson was required to attend sensitivity training and engage in community outreach efforts to address issues of bias within the legal system. Though it was a humbling process, He had been forced to confront his own limitations and to acknowledge that his understanding of justice had to evolve. While this process didn't fully erase the stain of his mistake, it allowed Thompson the opportunity to redeem himself, albeit in a much quieter, more reflective way. His public apology had been an important first step, but the real work came after the headlines had faded. In private moments, Thompson had begun to study the stories of individuals like Vanessa, who had persevered through the challenges of systemic biases, and he began to understand the weight of his actions in ways that would guide his future judgments. As for Vanessa, she knew that the road ahead was not going to be simple. Despite the national attention she had received, there were still battles to be fought. People who had once underestimated her were now watching with a mixture of admiration and suspicion. Was she truly the voice for change, or was she merely a product of a system trying to shift its own narrative? Vanessa didn't concern herself with those questions. She was focused on the work that needed to be done. She spearheaded initiatives aimed at creating more inclusive environments within the military and legal communities, pushing for better representation in leadership roles, and advocating for policies that would ensure people were not judged based on assumptions or appearances. Vanessa made it clear that her commitment wasn't to being a symbol, but to making tangible changes that would echo throughout the legal system for generations to come. Her role as Chief Justice for military tribunals became more influential with each passing day. She used it to mentor others, especially young people of color and women, encouraging them to pursue careers in law and justice. Vanessa wasn't just shaping the present. She was ensuring that the next generation would face fewer obstacles in their pursuit of fairness and equality. In the end, the story of Vanessa Reed wasn't just about a courtroom mistake. It was about the power of resilience, the need for respect, and the ongoing fight to ensure that justice truly was for all. And while the public's gaze would eventually shift elsewhere, Vanessa knew that the changes she had sparked would continue to ripple through the system long after the headlines faded away.